Imagine you're sitting in a sweltering car for, I don't know, like 14 hours straight.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and you're literally urinating into a wide-mouth plastic bottle just so you don't lose your vantage point.
The glamorous life.
Exactly. Your spare clothes are all rolled up into these tight little cylinders like submarine rations just to save space in the back seat. And you are just staring unblinkingly at a completely empty, aggressively boring suburban driveway.
Sounds awful.
It really does. I mean, this isn't some slick cinematic spy movie. This is the gritty, exhausting, and frankly, borderline absurd reality of finding out the absolute truth.
Yeah, it is entirely unglamorous. I mean, most people assume investigation is all about, high-tech gadgets and these dramatic face-to-face confrontations.
Right, like James Bond.
Exactly. But fundamentally, it's a test of attrition. It's really just about outweighting the lie.
And that is the perfect way to frame what we're doing today. We are taking a deep dive into this really incredible source text. It's called I Spy: How to Be Your Own Private Investigator by Daniel Rivicoff.
Yeah, his background is fascinating.
It really is. I mean, his perspective is what makes this so valuable. He's a former diamond dealer, a seasoned polygraph examiner, and an NYPD auxiliary cop. So he doesn't treat investigation like some dark art. He treats it as a highly practical, learnable science.
Well, his varied background gives him this totally unique lens. Like working in the Diamond District teaches you how to read people in these really high-stakes, high-stress negotiations.
Which is huge.
Oh, absolutely. And then law enforcement gives you the strict legal framework, and administering polygraphs provides this masterclass in human physiology and, the actual mechanics of deception. He takes all of that and distills it into methodologies that really anyone can apply.
Right. So the mission for this deep dive is to basically hand you that playbook. We're going to look at the professional techniques used to uncover the truth. Everything from like grinding out physical stakeouts to laying digital traps, all the way to the intense psychology of face-to-face credibility assessment.
And the key there is doing it legally.
Yes, exactly. The goal is to show you how to shortcut your way to the truth while staying strictly within the bounds of the law.
Which means we really have to start by dispelling that romanticized version of surveillance. We naturally default to the idea of a stationary stakeout when we suspect someone of lying. You think, oh, I'll just park outside their house and watch them.
Yeah, you see it on TV all the time.
Right. But as your opening scenario highlighted, true physical surveillance is an intense physiological and, frankly, psychological burden.
I mean, just reading his packing list for a stationary stakeout gave me a reality check. He emphasizes tinted windows, obviously, binoculars, the rolled-up clothes, and he specifically mandates packing those wide-mouth bottles for bathroom breaks. Because, the 1 minute you step out of the car to find a restroom is the exact minute your target is going to walk out their front door and vanish.
Well, it's about minimizing your own variables. The moment you open your car door, you introduce a visual and an auditory variable.
Makes sense.
If you start your engine just to run the AC because you're hot, the exhaust becomes a tell. The fundamental goal of a stationary stakeout is complete environmental integration. You are basically attempting to become a piece of urban furniture. You cannot react to the heat. You cannot react to the boredom.
Okay, let's unpack this, though, because hearing all of that makes me really question the boundaries here.
How so?
Well, if I'm sitting in my car outside someone's house for a dozen hours, taking notes, or, I'm actively tailing their vehicle through city traffic, I am struggling to see how that isn't just the literal definition of stalking.
Right, I get that. But it really comes down to the legal distinction between observation and intimidation. Rivicoff is very adamant about operating strictly within the law.
Okay.
Stalking legally involves a pattern of behavior that's intended to instill fear, cause distress, or exert aggressive pressure. Harassment requires a specific intent to intimidate or bother someone.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. If you are conducting proper surveillance, you're a ghost. The target has absolutely no idea you are there, which means you cannot be intimidating them. You're just a completely neutral bystander gathering data.
So the moment you interact with their environment, you cross the line.
Precisely. You cannot commit trespass just to get a better angle, and you certainly cannot commit entrapment.
Right.
For example, if you're investigating, say, a fraudulent workers' comp claim where a guy says he can't lift heavy objects, you cannot sneak over and let the air out of his tire, hoping to snap a picture of him changing it.
Because you forced the situation.
Exactly. You're artificially creating the scenario. You have to sit in that sweltering car and wait for him to decide to lift something heavy entirely on his own.
You have to let them make the unforced error. That actually leads perfectly into what happens when the target does get in their car and move.
Yeah.
Rivicoff breaks down moving surveillance, and he highlights this concept called the rubber band method.
That's a great concept.
It really is.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense when you visualize driving like a slinky. So, on long, uninterrupted straightaways, the slinky stretches way out. You give the target massive distance so you don't become like a fixture in their rearview mirror.
Yeah, you don't want them noticing the same car for 5 miles.
Right. But when you approach an intersection or a highway exit, the slinky bunches up. You have to aggressively close the gap so they don't turn and just disappear.
And it is a relentless, high-stress cognitive load. You aren't just following a car, you are constantly reading the macroscopic flow of traffic.
Yeah, predicting what everyone else is doing.
Exactly. You're anticipating stoplights. If the light ahead is turning yellow, you have to decide in a split second, do I speed up and risk burning my cover by blowing through it right behind them? Or do I hang back, hit the red, and risk losing them entirely? It's a constant calculation of risk versus reward.
And if you do lose them, or if you simply cannot afford to sit outside their house for 10 hours waiting for them to leave, he has this wonderfully analog trick.
Oh, the watch trick. I love this one.
It's so smart. You buy a cheap, like $3 Kmart watch, you cut the straps off, set it to the correct time, and quietly wedge it under the passenger side tire of the target's car.
Yeah.
When they finally drive away, the tire rolls over the watch, shatters the face, and literally stops the hands. So you just swing by later, pick up the broken watch, and you know the exact minute they left.
There is a certain elegance to that, really. In an era where we overcomplicate everything with GPS trackers, which, by the way, run into massive legal gray areas regarding wiretapping and unauthorized tracking devices, this method bypasses all of it.
Totally.
It just relies purely on gravity and pressure.
He also shares some incredible stories about the lengths his investigators have to go to when they follow targets on foot. Like there's this story about an agent named Carlos.
Oh, man, the strip club story.
Yes. Carlos is trailing a woman who is claiming a severe back injury for a massive insurance payout. She goes into a strip club. Carlos follows her, but he realizes the bouncers are aggressively patting everyone down looking for cameras.
Right.
So he goes into a bathroom stall, breaks his camera equipment down, hides the core components literally in his crotch to get past security, and then runs the lens wire up through his shirt to a specialized beeper on his chest.
It just highlights the extreme adaptability required out in the field. But the real challenge wasn't even smuggling the camera in. It was what happened once he was actually out on the floor.
Right, because the target, who supposedly has this debilitating spinal injury, is dancing wildly with the crowd. She comes over to where Carlos is standing, opens her top, and all the men around him are, putting money in and giving her a squeeze.
Yeah.
Carlos realizes that if he declined, just stands there rigidly, he is going to draw the attention of the bouncers and the target, so he has to participate. He actually has to physically squeeze the target's chest while his chest-mounted beeper camera silently films the entire interaction.
I mean, as absurd as that sounds, it's deeply rooted in sound behavioral psychology.
Yeah, how so?
Well, if you are the single person in a room who is not engaging in the normative behavior of that specific environment, you instantly become an anomaly.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. And the human brain is hardwired to notice anomalies. To remain invisible, Carlos had to mimic the environment perfectly.
It just requires an unbelievable ability to improvise. Like another agent, Nelson, had to ID a guy at his house. He throws on a tool belt, grabs a clipboard, and knocks on the front door, pretending to be a repairman there to fix the dishwasher.
A classic pretext.
Right. But the guy opens the door and says, "Oh, great, I've been waiting for you." Nelson is trapped. He actually has to walk into the kitchen, stick his head inside the dishwasher, and pretend to diagnose a plumbing issue, all while trying not to laugh because he realizes the target looks exactly like the mascot Captain Crunch.
That is the reality of pretexting. When the target flips the script on you, the cognitive requirement to maintain your cover story is massive. You can't freeze. You just have to lean into the fiction you've created with total confidence.
But, hearing these stories makes you realize just how labor-intensive and unpredictable physical surveillance really is. You're risking exposure, you're hiding cameras in bathrooms, you're pretending to be a plumber.
It's exhausting.
Right. The sheer exhaustion and high failure rate of tailing someone naturally points to a more efficient method. Here's where it gets really interesting. Why work so hard to follow someone's physical body when human beings are incredibly lazy about the data they leave behind?
That's the natural evolution of an investigation. Physical tracking is, at best, a blunt instrument. Exploiting a target's digital and physical breadcrumb trail is a scalpel. People leak actionable data constantly, and usually without even realizing it.
Ribicoff discusses skip tracing, which relies on simple identifiers. Like if you just search for a common name online, you are drowning in thousands of irrelevant results.
Yeah, John Smith gets you nowhere.
Exactly. But if you can attach a middle initial, a date of birth, or even a high school graduation year, you instantly filter out the noise.
It relies on cross-referencing databases. Like you said, a single data point, like a first name, is practically useless. But when you layer multiple data points, those overlapping sets shrink dramatically. You're building a constellation of data that eventually forms a unique fingerprint of the target's life.
But what happens when the digital trail runs cold? Say you need their current cell phone number, but they have it totally locked down. Ribicoff uses these digital traps that just brilliantly exploit human nature.
Yes, the burner apps.
Yeah, he'll use apps to spoof phone calls, but his most brilliant trap involves an 800 number. He has his team stick a fake missed delivery slip on a target's front door. It says they missed a package, and they need to call this toll-free 1-800 number to reschedule. The target calls it, assuming they are perfectly safe because they have caller ID blocking turned on.
And this is where a deep understanding of telecommunications infrastructure pays off.
Okay, let me see if I can reverse engineer this. If I call a normal number, my caller ID block works, right? But if I call an 800 number, that means it is toll-free for me. The person who owns the 800 number is the one paying for the call.
Exactly.
And if they're paying the telecom company for the incoming call, the telecom company has to provide them with an itemized bill showing exactly who called. So it acts like a digital spider web catching a fly. It completely overrides the caller ID block.
You absolutely nailed it. It's a billing loophole known as automatic number identification, or ANI. Because the receiver assumes the financial cost of the call, federal regulations stipulate they have the right to know what they are paying for.
Wow.
The target's block is stripped away instantly, and the investigator captures their true cell phone number the very second the call connects.
It is brilliant. They voluntarily hand over their most guarded piece of information just because they are curious about a mysterious package. But if they don't take the bait, Ribicoff isn't above going back to the physical world to gather intel. Specifically, he will pull their garbage.
Garbage retrieval is often the absolute goldmine of an investigation. We carefully curate our digital lives, but we are remarkably careless with our physical waste.
I have to admit, I found myself questioning both the ethics and the legality of this. Going through someone's trash feels incredibly invasive. How is a normal person legally allowed to just snatch a garbage bag off the street?
It stems from a landmark 1988 Supreme Court ruling, California v. Greenwood. The court essentially determined that when you place your trash in opaque bags on the public curb for the express purpose of having a third party take it away, you have explicitly relinquished your expectation of privacy.
Seriously?
Yeah. Legally, it becomes abandoned property. However, the geographic boundaries are incredibly strict here. If the garbage can is sitting on the side of their house or leaning against their garage, it is still within the curtilage of their private property.
Okay.
Touching it there is trespassing. It absolutely must be on the public curb.
Which means the timing has to be perfect. And the actual mechanics of doing a trash pull are just brutal. Ribicoff stresses that you need industrial masks and heavy-duty gloves. You are digging through rotting food, used diapers, and wet coffee grounds just to find, like, a crumpled receipt.
It's disgusting.
Truly. And if the target is paranoid and strip-shredded their documents, you are taking those bags home and spending 12 hours taping tiny ribbons of paper back together like the world's worst jigsaw puzzle.
The physical disgust is really the barrier to entry. But the payoff almost always justifies the effort. A person's trash is an unfiltered reflection of their reality.
Right.
You find bank statements, credit card bills showing hotels they swore they never visited, handwritten notes, prescription bottles. It completely bypasses whatever narrative they are trying to spin.
And if they never put the trash on the curb. Ribicoff tells a story about a target who always kept the bins by the garage. So Ribicoff simply waited down the street for the garbage truck, walked up to the sanitation worker, handed him $100, and said, "When you walk up to grab the trash from that specific house, don't throw it in the compactor. Just hold on to it and hand it to me at the end of the block.
Which perfectly illustrates how a seasoned investigator views systems. Every system, no matter how rigid, has a human element, and human beings can be incentivized.
Yeah, money talks.
Right. Ribicoff didn't break the law there. The sanitation worker had the legal right and permission to walk onto the property and collect the trash. Ribicoff simply rerouted the final delivery.
He uses that same understanding of human incentives to bypass security altogether. Like the story of a client in Denver whose ex stole their prized Westie dogs and went into hiding.
Oh, that's a clever one.
Very. Instead of launching a massive, expensive search, Ribicoff found a phone number for the ex's family member. He called them up, pretended to be a television producer, and claimed he was trying to cast the ex in a lucrative new reality show. The family member was so excited they immediately gave up this secret location in Colorado.
What's fascinating here is that tactic exploits two of our most fundamental vulnerabilities, vanity and curiosity. People will diligently guard their privacy against perceived threats, but the moment you offer them a package delivery or, 15 minutes of fame, they will eagerly dismantle their own operational security.
It's crazy how well it works. So what does this all mean? You've watched them from a sweltering car. You've tracked their data. You've taped their shredded bank statements back together. You have the leverage. Now you have to actually confront them. You're sitting across a table from them. How do you know if they're lying to your face in real time?
This brings us to the absolute pinnacle of the investigative process credibility assessment. And the foundational concept you have to grasp is the profound psychological difference between an interview and an interrogation.
Ribicoff breaks this down with the 5% versus 95% rule. If you're conducting an interview, your goal is purely fact-finding. You act entirely neutral. You speak maybe 5% of the time, asking broad, open-ended questions and simply letting them talk.
Right.
He even suggests mirroring their body language. Like, if they lean back and cross their legs, you subtly lean back and cross yours.
And that mirroring is a powerful psychological tool. It isn't just about copying their posture. It's about subconscious rapport building. Humans naturally mirror the people they feel comfortable with.
I heard that, yeah.
By artificially introducing that mirroring, you trick their subconscious into feeling a false sense of security, which helps establish a baseline of normal behavior. An interrogation, however, completely inverts this dynamic.
Right. In an interrogation, you already have the evidence. You aren't gathering facts anymore. You are seeking a confession. Now, you speak 95% of the time. You deliver a monologue outlining the evidence. You stop mirroring them. In fact, you slowly, incrementally encroach on their physical space to remove whatever psychological barriers they are using to protect themselves.
And while you are applying that intense pressure, you're analyzing their verbal and nonverbal reactions. Verbally, deceptive people rely heavily on linguistic stall tactics.
Right. He points out that guilty people will hesitate. They will answer a simple question with another question. Or they overuse words like, honestly. If you ask them where they were, they say, honestly, I was just at the store.
When you ask a truthful person a question, they simply access a memory and report it. When you ask a deceptive person a question, their brain is working in absolute overdrive. They have to recall the lie they previously told, check it against the evidence you just presented, and construct a plausible new fiction.
That's a lot of processing power.
Exactly. Their mouth uses filler words or repeats the question simply to buy their brain extra processing time.
I found his use of projective testing fascinating, too. He'll point to a random, innocuous picture on his office wall, like a painting of a sailboat on the water, and he will ask the subject to describe what is happening in the painting.
The psychology underlying projective testing is brilliant. Truthful individuals who are not carrying a heavy cognitive burden will generally project a neutral or positive narrative onto the image. They'll say, the family on the boat is enjoying a nice sunny afternoon.
And the deceptive ones.
Deceptive individuals are internally consumed by the stress of their lie. Their brain is actively in threat detection mode. So when asked to interpret an ambiguous image, that internal anxiety bleeds out. They will look at the exact same sailboat and say, a storm is brewing, or the boat looks like it's about to sink.
That is wild. And then you layer the body language on top of that, the leaking deception. Ribicoff looks for people who have ants in their pants, unable to sit still. Or they create physical barriers, like folding their arms tightly across their chest. Or they display inappropriate smiling when discussing something serious.
Yes, all classic signs.
But I had to stop and challenge this. If I'm sitting across from you, and I fold my arms across my chest, or I won't look you in the eye, maybe the room is just cold. Or maybe I am naturally introverted and eye contact makes me uncomfortable. How is that definitive proof of deception?
That is the most critical pushback to make, and failing to understand that is exactly why amateurs misread situations constantly. You can never look at a single physical gesture in a vacuum. You must establish a baseline. Before you ask them about the stolen money or the affair, you ask them completely harmless questions. Did you have trouble finding parking today? How was the weather outside? You observe how they behave when they are completely stress-free.
So you get their normal.
Exactly. If they naturally cross their arms or they naturally avoid eye contact during the baseline questions, you completely discount those behaviors later. You are only looking for a sharp deviation from their established baseline that occurs precisely when the stress of a relevant question is introduced.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. You're looking for the spike in the graph, not the overall shape of the line. So you establish the baseline, you ask the hard question, you see the deviation, and you know they're lying. Now, my immediate instinct would be to slam my hands on the table, point a finger, and yell, "I know you did it."
Which guarantees you will almost never get the truth. Screaming at a suspect triggers their primal fight-or-flight response. Their biological imperative takes over, and they will completely shut down or become combative. Rivicoff advocates for what he calls the honey versus vinegar approach.
Catch more flies with honey.
Exactly. You actually have to minimize the moral weight of their crime through empathy. You have to make them feel safe enough to confess.
He suggests a tactic where you share a completely fake story about your own past mistakes just to build that bridge. Like if you know an employee stole money from the register, you don't call him a thief. You say, "Listen, I understand what you're going through. When I was your age, I was struggling to pay rent, and I took $50 from my boss's desk. I felt awful about it, but I learned. We're all human, and we all make mistakes."
You're manipulating the cognitive load of guilt. Carrying a significant lie is mentally exhausting. Subconsciously, many guilty people desperately want to be caught just to relieve the internal pressure.
Really, they want to be caught.
Yes. This raises an important question about human psychology. If you attack them, they will defend themselves. But if you offer them an empathetic, judgment-free off-ramp, they will almost always take it.
It's remarkably effective. He tells an anecdote about an investigator who was brought into a jewelry store experiencing internal theft. The investigator walks in carrying a stack of VHS tapes with big labels that say Hidden Camera 1 and Hidden Camera 2.
The bluff?
Yeah, the bluff, the reality. Those tapes just had old recorded episodes of ALF and Who's the Boss on.
Oh.
He sets the tapes on the table, bluffs the staff about having them all on video, and this sweet little old lady immediately breaks down and confesses to stealing the jewelry.
The tapes were the catalyst, but the environment of inevitability is what broke her resolve. She felt the pressure of the lie colliding with the supposed certainty of the evidence.
Sometimes you don't even need to orchestrate a complex interrogation. Rivicoff tells a story about a high-end Park Avenue surgeon who hired him because the office manager was bleeding the practice dry, stealing massive amounts of cash. Rivicoff investigates and quickly realizes the manager has a severe opioid addiction. He tells the surgeon, "You didn't need to pay my expensive daily rate to figure this out. You just needed to spend $25 at the drugstore on a basic pee test before you hired her."
It is a stark reminder that the most effective investigative tool is often preventative diligence rather than reactive surveillance.
But when he does have to be reactive, Rivicoff uses the polygraph. But he clarifies a major misconception here. People think they can beat the machine. He says you cannot beat the machine because it is simply recording your autonomic nervous system.
What guilty people try to do is beat the examiner.
Yes.
They use mental countermeasures, like trying to do complex math backwards in their head while answering questions, or they induce physical pain like biting their tongue to artificially spike their blood pressure on the control questions, hoping to muddy the data.
But an experienced polygraph examiner expects exactly that behavior. They're not just looking for the physiological signature of a lie. They're explicitly trained to recognize the distinct physiological signature of the countermeasure itself. Trying to beat an examiner with a thumbtack in your shoe is essentially trying to outsmart a seasoned professional at a game they play every single day. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started in the cramped, physically punishing reality of a stakeout, learning the intense patience required to wait out a lie. We moved into the efficiency of the digital realm, exploring how to exploit billing laws with phone traps, and the visceral reality of piecing together shredded trash. Finally, we dissected the psychological battlefield of the interrogation, learning how to read baseline deviations and use empathy to relieve the cognitive load of a suspect until they confess.
The ultimate takeaway here isn't that you need to go out and start running surveillance on your neighbors or coworkers. Fundamentally, these are defensive skills. By understanding how a professional investigator thinks, how they methodically gather means, motive, and opportunity, you become acutely aware of your own vulnerabilities. You learn how to harden your defenses against being scammed, victimized, or deceived.
You stop being the easy mark. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We just spent this entire time breaking down how incredibly easy it is for anyone armed with just a little bit of patience and knowledge to pull your trash bag off the curb, exploit your curiosity, to grab your real phone number, or decipher the subtle, anxious twitch of your eye during a conversation. So ask yourself, what kind of breadcrumb trail are you actively leaving behind right this very second, and who might be picking it up?